I, again L, I have E, comma, I have A, then we have R, and finally I have N. So these are the letters which have been represented as a tuple. Simply learn, then I'll use the slice function and I'll give my range as 5 and will print A of X. Let's run it. You see it here. The slice function has sliced the first 5 elements in my tuple. So we have S, I, M, P and L. Cool. So we have explored all the important built-in Python functions. Now let's head over to using user-defined functions or learning user-defined functions in Python. I'll give a comment first, user-defined functions. Cool. So as we had learned in our slides, to define a user-defined function, we will use the def keyword and a function name. This should be a valid Python name. So I'm using func1 followed by parenthesis and then we'll have a colon. And now we'll define the body of the function. I'll say print hello world. This is the same example that we had seen in our slide. Now I'm going to call the function using the function name, which is func1. If I run it, you can see it here. I have my message printed hello world. So this is a very simple user-defined function and it does not carry any arguments or parameters. Now let me show you another user-defined function. I'll say def hello. Again, we are not giving any parameter to this function or arguments to this function. I'll say name equal to str. This time we are going to take the input from the user, so I'm using the input function. I'll say enter your country name, I'll give a colon and a space, and then we'll say print. I'll print the message hello followed by a space, give a plus sign, and we are going to convert our name to string. So this is my function. Let me run it. Now I'll call hello. It is asking me for entering country name. I'll say Japan. If I hit enter, it says hello, then my country name, which is Japan. So hello Japan. Let me run it again. This time I'll say USA. I'll hit enter. You can see here my message is hello USA. Cool. Now moving ahead to our next example, where we'll see using functions with different parameters. So we'll start with a very simple example. I'll say def. I want to convert feet to centimeter. I'll say my function name as ft_2_cm. So I'll pass in a value for feet, and that feet will be converted to centimeters. And this time inside parenthesis I'm going to pass in my parameter as ft. I'll use the formula for centimeter. I'll say my variable centimeter equal to feet multiplied by 30.48. So 1 feet is actually 30.48 centimeters. So centimeter becomes feet into 30.48. Then we are going to use the return keyword, and I'm going to return the output, which is centimeter. Let's run it. Now to call the function, I'll use my function name, which is ft_2_cm. This is my function name. and then I'm going to pass in a value for feet. Let's say I want to convert 6 feet into centimeters. If I run it, there you go. You can see it here. 6 feet is actually 182.88 centimeters. Let's say 5.8. If I run it, it is 176.784 centimeters. So here you saw how to pass in arguments to a user-defined function. Now again you can pass in multiple arguments. Let's say I'm going to find the sum of two values. For that I'll create a function called def. My function name is add. I'm going to add two values x and y. So I'm passing in two parameters x comma y. I'll create a variable called sum that will store the value of x plus y, and then let's print sum. Okay, let me just scroll down. I'll hit shift enter to run it. Okay, we have created my function, that is add. Now let's add 40 and 50. You have to pass in two arguments because we have declared x and y in the function, so it needs at least two arguments. If I run it, you have the sum of 40 and 50, which is 90. Let's say I have minus 20 and 30. If I run it, you have the result. Minus 20 plus 30 is 10. Alright. Now similarly you can also multiply two numbers. Let me just copy this. I'll paste it here, and instead of add, I'll give my user-defined function name as multiply. I'll say product equal to x asterisk y, and I'll print product. Let's run it. I'll call my function using the function name multiply. Let's say 4 multiplied by 6. So the result is 24. Cool. Now moving ahead, we'll explore another example. Let's say I want to print the absolute value of a number. So I'm creating a function called def. My function name is absolute, and I'll pass in one parameter, which is x. I'm going to use a if-else statement. I'll say if x is greater than or equal to 0, I'll give a colon, then I'll say return x, else give a colon, I'll say return minus x. I'll run it. Now if I print absolute of, let's say, 56, the result is as expected. Since 56 is greater than 0, we have just returned 56. Let me just copy this. I'll paste it here. Let's say absolute of minus 56 is again 56 because we are returning minus x, so minus of minus 56 becomes plus 56. Now if you wanted to return minus 56, you need to make some modifications. I'll put another minus and keep this within brackets. Let me run the function again, and now if I print absolute of minus 56, you have the result as minus 56. Okay. Now let's see another example how to find the factorial of a number using a user-defined function. So we'll define our function as def. I'll use the function name as factorial. I'm going to pass in a parameter called x. I'll say if x is equal to 0, then we'll just return x or return 1. I'll say else, give a colon, return, I'll say x asterisk or multiplied by, I'll use the function name factorial, I'll say x minus 1. Now let's run it. I'll call my function factorial. Let's say I want to find the factorial of 5. The result is 120. Let's say the factorial of 10. The result is 36,28,800. Cool. Now let's see how you can pass in default arguments to your function or default parameters. Okay, suppose I have a function defined called welcome. Here I'm going to pass my argument as name, and in the argument itself I'll pass in the value, a default value, let's say Paul, give a colon, and I'll print hello. This would be within quotes, and the name. Cool. Let me just run it. Now I'm going to call the function welcome. This time I'm not giving any value to my function. If I run it, it has automatically taken the default argument, which was Paul, so my message becomes hello Paul. Now let's say I'll pass in a value welcome, and within quotes I'll say Racy. Now the message becomes hello Racy. So if you pass in a value to your function welcome explicitly, it will take that value instead of the default argument. Cool. Now you can also have multiple arguments in your function, as we saw above for the addition and multiplication functions. I'll create a function called message, and we'll have the arguments as name1, name2, and name3. Give a colon. I'll say print a message that is hello. Give a space, give a comma. We have name1, give a comma, and then I'll say comma, please tell, give another comma. I'll have my name2, give a comma, followed by the message that. Then I have name3, this should be a comma instead of a period. Then I'll say is waiting. Make sure this is within quotations again. Just give a exclamation mark. Okay, so I have my message. Let's run it. Now I'll call my function message. We need 3 arguments now, so I'll pass in 3 names. Let's say my first name is Gilly, my second name is Rachel, and my third name is, let's say, Shaw. I'll run it, and you can see here we have my message printed hello followed by name1, which is Gilly. So hello Gilly, please tell name2, which is Rachel. So please tell Rachel that name3, which is Shaw, that Shaw is waiting. Cool. Now we'll understand about scope of variables in a function. Now your scope could be a global scope or a local scope. Let's define a function called func3. Now inside the function I'm going to create a variable called z, which has a value of 7. Now I'll just print z, and I'll call in my function 3. If I run it, you have the value printed of z, that is 7. Now if I want to access my variable, that is z, outside the function, if I run this, it throws me an error because this variable z was defined locally, that is inside the function, and you cannot access z outside the function. Now to overcome this issue, let me just copy this. We are going to declare z as a global variable. So I'll have z outside the function. I'll say z equal to 7, and then I have my function defined. I'll just change the name of the function to function 4, and then we'll print z, and I'll call the function 4. If I run it, you can see it here. I have the value of z printed, that is 7. Now if I want to access z outside the function, then also it's fine, because we have defined z outside the function, that is z is now a global variable, so its scope is throughout the function. Now another thing to note here is you can't change the value from inside a local scope. So if I say z equal to 7, and then I'll define my function func, let's say 5, I'll give a colon, and I'll say, let's say I want to alter the value of z to, let's say, z plus 7. I'll print z, and let me now call func5. If I run this, it throws me an error. As I said, it says local variable z referenced before assignment, so you can't change its value from inside a local scope. For that, you're going to explicitly define the variable z as global. Let me show you how to do it. I've just copied this code, I'll paste it here. I'll say z equal to 7. I'll define my function, let's say func6. Here I'm going to say global z. So I've explicitly defined my z as a global variable. Now if I call the function 6, you can see here we have altered the value of z from 7 to z plus 1, that is 7 plus 1, which is 8. Okay. Now asterisk args in function definitions in Python are used to pass a variable number of arguments to a function. Suppose you don't know the exact number of arguments you need, so you can use the argument with an asterisk symbol. Let me show you how to do it. I'll say def welcome, and here I'm going to pass in asterisk followed by the name of my argument, which is names. I'll say print. I'll print my message as hello, comma. Then I'm going to say names, the first name, which is with index value of 0, comma, followed by a space. Then I have name 1. I'll give a comma followed by a space, and then we'll have names 2. This should be names. Okay, let me run this. Now I'll call my function welcome. Now you can see here I have passed in my argument, that is names, 3 times. So let's call 3 names. Let's say we have Steve, then we have Bill, and then we have, let's say, Yash. Now if I run this, there you go. We have a message printed, hello, Steve, Bill, Yash. Okay. Now coming to the final section of our demo. Here we are going to find out the area of a circle and a sphere. So we are going to define 2 functions, one for circle and another for sphere. So first of all, let me define the value of pi, which is 3.14. I'll start with def. I'll give my function name as circle area, and inside that I'll pass in my argument, that is radius. I'll give a colon, and we are going to return the area of a circle, which is pi r square. So I'll have radius, again an asterisk symbol, and then radius. So this becomes pi into radius, which is pi r square. Okay, now let's define another function called def. I'll say sphere area. I'll have my argument as radius, give a colon, and say return 4 pi r square, which is the area of a sphere. So I'll have 4 multiplied by pi multiplied by radius multiplied by radius. So this becomes 4 pi r square. Now we are going to define the main function. So I'll say define main, where we'll just have our print statement. So I'll say print circle area with radius 15. I'll give a comma and say circle area, which is my function name, and we'll pass in the value of the radius, which is 15. I'll just copy this message and we'll print it here. I'll say sphere area with radius 15 is, I'll just change this to sphere, and let's say we'll have radius for 10 instead of 15. Okay. Finally, I'm going to call my main function, so I'll just say main. Now let's run it. Okay, there is one error here. This is an indentation problem. Now we'll run it again. There you go. So the circle area with radius 15 is 3.14, which is the pi value multiplied by radius into radius, that is 15 into 15. So the value is 706.5, and similarly the sphere area with radius 10 is 4 into 3.14 into 10 into 10, that is 1256. Alright. So what is a lambda function? A lambda function is one of the simplest ways to define a function in Python. A lambda function is an anonymous function defined without a name and does not have the def keyword. It can accept any number of arguments but can only have one expression. So the function is always defined using the lambda keyword, which you can see it here. So here we have the syntax for lambda function. We use the lambda keyword followed by the arguments, and then we have a colon. After that we have the expression that we want to evaluate. Cool. Now moving ahead, let's look at an example of using lambda function in Python. Now if you were to add two numbers in Python using a function, you would ideally use the def keyword followed by the function name and then pass in the arguments. You can see the arguments here, a and b. Then use the return statement to get the value of the addition. So we have return a plus b, and finally you will call the add function and pass the argument values to get the result. Now this operation can be done using the lambda function as shown here. So we have defined a variable called add, which is equal to, and then we have used the lambda function followed by the two parameters or arguments. So here a and b are the arguments, and then I have my expression a plus b. See, all this you can do it in one line. And then to call the function you use print followed by the variable which is add, and then you have the arguments 3, 8. So the addition of 3 plus 8 would be 11. Now you can see that instead of using the def keyword, we have used the lambda keyword, and there is no parenthesis required. Anything after the lambda keyword is treated as a parameter or argument. So we use a colon to separate parameters and the expression. In our case the expression is a plus b. Now moving ahead, we'll look at the pros and cons of lambda functions. So lambda functions are suitable for simple logical operations. So when we want one expression in return, we can use the lambda function. Now lambda function is used as a parameter to different functions such as map, filter, reduce. We will see all this in our demo session. Now coming to the cons of using a lambda function. So lambda functions can only evaluate one expression, as I told you earlier. You cannot write a doc string to explain all the inputs, operations and outputs as you would do in a normal user-defined function that uses the def keyword. And finally, lambda functions are generally not preferred when you have to declare a function with multiple lines of code. Now let's head over to our Jupyter notebook where we will learn about lambda functions and how to use it in different ways. So I'm on my Jupyter notebook. Let me just go ahead and will rename the notebook as lambda functions in Python. Okay, I'll just click on rename. Cool. First of all, I'll write a general user-defined function using the def keyword. Let's say I want to add two numbers. So this example we have already seen in our slide. So the way to do is I'll use the def keyword followed by the function name, and then I'm giving my arguments or the parameters. After that, let's say I want to store the addition of a plus b in a variable called result. So I'll say result equal to a plus b, and then I want to return my output, that is result, so I'll say return result. So this is how you will normally create a function in Python. If I run it, and then I'm going to call my function using the function name, that is add, and then I'll pass in my parameters a and b. Let's say my a is 3 and b is 4. If I run this, I will get the result 7, which is fair enough. Now if I want to do the same operation using a lambda function, I would do something like this. Let's say I'll create a variable called add, and then I'm going to use the lambda function followed by the arguments a comma b. Then I'll give a colon and say a plus b. After that, I'll just say add and then pass in my parameters 3 comma 4. If I run it, you have the same result, that is 7. Now let's see another example using lambda functions to add a number. This time I'm going to pass in only one argument. So I'll say add equal to lambda, my argument is x, I'll say x colon x plus, let's say I want to add x with 100. I'll say print add, let's say I want to add 50 with 100. If I run it, I have the result 150. Alright. Now in Python, there is no need to assign a lambda to a variable. You can directly call it. Let me show you how to do it. I'll say lambda a comma b, which are my arguments. Again, this time I'm going to use a multiplication operator since I want to do a product of a and b, and after that, using another parenthesis, you can directly pass in the arguments. So there is no need to explicitly assign a lambda to a variable. So if I want to find the product of, let's say 15 comma 30, if I run it, I have the result 40. Let's change the arguments. Let's say I want to find the product of 5 comma 7. The answer is 35. So this is known as an immediately invoked function expression, or IIFE, which is often pronounced as IFE. Now you can also use keyword arguments using lambda functions. Let me show you what I mean. I'll create my lambda function and assign it to a variable called product. I'll say lambda, let's say my arguments are x, y and z. After that, I'll give a colon and say x multiplied by y multiplied by z. Next, I'll say print my variable, that is product, and here I'm going to use keyword arguments. So I'll say, let's say z equal to 5, x equal to 10 and y equal to 4. You can see here this need not be in an order as you have defined the arguments. If I run this, I have the result, the product of 5 multiplied by 10 multiplied by 4 is 200. Now you can also use default arguments. Suppose I say add equal to, I'll use the lambda function and say x comma y, I am assigning a default value of, let's say 15, and z, let's say I'll assign a default value of 24. Then I'll give my colon followed by the expression, that is x plus y plus z. Now I'll say print add. Now here I'm going to only pass in my value for x, since I've already given a default value for argument y and z. So my function only needs one argument, that is x. So let's say I want x to be 20. If I run this, you see the result here. So 20 plus 15 plus 24 is 59. Now you can also use the asterisk args parameter or args. So this allows you to define as many arguments as you want. So I'll say addition equal to lambda, then I'll say asterisk args. So this will allow us to pass in as many arguments as you want, and I want to find the sum of args. So I'm using the inbuilt sum function in Python. Now I'll say print my variable name, that is addition, and let's say I want to find the sum for 4 values or 4 arguments, let's say 20, 2, 40 and let's say 50. If I run it, so the value is 112. So 20 plus 2 plus 40 plus 50 is 112. Cool. Now lambda functions are also used with higher order functions which take one or more functions as arguments or return one or more functions. Let me show you. So I'll define a variable called higher underscore ord underscore fun, which stands for function and ord stands for order. So I'll declare my lambda function. Suppose the parameters are x, and then I have a function, and then followed by a colon I have my expression as x plus function of x. Now I'll say higher underscore ord underscore fun, and I'll pass in my 2 arguments. Let's say my x is 20, and for this function I'll have a lambda function defined. I'll say lambda x colon x multiplied by x.